Welcome back, everybody, to Eat the Rich. This is a show about our political economy, late-stage capitalism, and the millionaires, billionaires, and multinational corporations hell-bent on staving off its death rattle. I'm Dwight, and it's just me. This is a Dwight-only episode. I had hoped at the time of recording that I would have come up with a name for what I want this format to be titled, and potentially by the time we actually release it, maybe I will have done that or not. We're going to go on this journey together. The purpose of this format of a solo episode is there's a lot of news items that come at us that I think deserve a bit more dissection. And I think if you're a listener, if you're a Patreon listener especially, you know by now that Eat the Rich takes information that's totally public, but interrogates it in a way that allows us to understand more of how the actual political... Fucking turn off my phone. Oh boy. All right. It's about coronavirus. Okay, so let's get into the material here. There's a few news items which I would like for us to go through, and let's have a little bit of a discussion about them together. Some things that I think we need to bring some attention to. The first segment here is going to revolve around tech companies. So we're going to take a look at one of the first news items here, which is from a publication called Krebs on Security. I don't know who this guy is, but it's very interesting. And this came out on the 19th of February. The title of the article is Hackers Were Inside Citrix for 5 Months. Networking software giant Citrix Systems says malicious hackers were inside its networks for 5 months between 2018 and 2019, making off with personal and financial data on company employees, contractors, interns, job candidates, and their dependents. The disclosure comes almost a year after Citrix acknowledged that digital intruders had broken in by probing its employee accounts for weak passwords. Damn, Digital Intruders would be a great band name. Citrix, if for anybody that's not familiar, it's a company that provides software that hundreds of thousands of clients have used worldwide, many Fortune 100 companies. They do a VPN software, and they also do like remote network desktop software and stuff like that. The FBI alerted Citrix in March 2019 that they had reason to believe cyber criminals had gained access to the company's internal network. The FBI told Citrix that the hackers likely got in using a technique called password spraying. Yikes. A relatively crude but remarkably effective attack that attempts to access a large number of employee accounts using just a handful of common passwords. Basically, my interpretation of that is just like boomers saying, you know, their password is like password 123, and then that's how you get in. At the time, Citrix said that it appeared that hackers may have accessed and downloaded business documents, and said that it was still working to identify what precisely was accessed or stolen. I don't think we should go too deep into this. I want to keep this relatively high level, but let's think about this for a second and go back to that first paragraph, that the hackers were able to obtain personal and financial data on company employees, contractors, interns, job candidates, and their dependents. Obviously, if we're just talking on a pure company employee basis, you know, what financial information does an employer have on their employees? Well, fucking quite a lot. Social security numbers, W-2 tax information, addresses, just their dependents, banking routing number and account number information if you have direct deposit. And for an entirety of 5 months, a software company that bases its entire job function on cybersecurity was hacked and was just basically an open door. I think this kind of ties into a larger theme, but let's move on to the second article and see if we can tie some of this stuff together. So this second article came out in the Washington Post today. We're recording Wednesday, February 26th. This came out just now. Washington Post. The article is, ICE has run facial recognition searches on millions of Maryland drivers. The agency's unlimited access to drivers' photos has alarmed immigration and privacy activists who fear it's being used to target immigrants who sought driver's licenses after 2013. Let's just read a little bit into the material here. U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement officials have been permitted to run facial recognition searches on millions of Maryland driver's license photos without first seeking state or court approval, state officials said. Access that goes far beyond what other states allow, and that alarms immigration activists in a state that grants special driver's licenses to undocumented immigrants. More than 275,000 such licenses have been issued statewide since 2013, when the state first became the first on the East Coast to defy federal guidelines and allow undocumented immigrants to obtain a license without having to provide proof of legal status. The technology now under scrutiny could let an ICE official run a photograph of an unknown person through the system and see if any potentially undocumented immigrants are returned as a match. I mean, imagine the destructive power here. I mean, we're talking 275,000 people that are living and likely working in the state of Maryland that ICE is, potentially running dragnet exercises across the state, taking pictures of people and trying to match up who they are. It is I think, an unequivocally good thing for a state to offer driver's licenses to undocumented immigrants, obviously, because there's a lot of things that you need ID to do. There's buildings you need ID to get into. So in order to be a functional member of our society, you need identification. Unfortunately, it's just the nature of the beast. And so I think it's a good thing for states to do. Unfortunately, when you have a burgeoning fascistic federal government, where the head of government and his cabal around him have fascistic ambitions, then you run the risk of this happening. And we're putting at risk potentially, let's call it 275,000 licenses. A million families. a million people, let's just say, within a family, if we're talking families here. This is a problem that I think we're going to see evolve. I don't see the end of this coming shortly. And finally, let's take a look at one more tech-related headline here. This is something that came out yesterday, the 25th of February, saying Uber and Lyft generate 70% more pollution than trips they displace. This is from Andrew J. Hawkins in The Verge. And we'll read the beginning here. Uber and Lyft have weathered criticism about pollution and traffic congestion for years, but it's been difficult to get an exact gauge about how much ride-hailing contributes to daily emissions. A new study released today claims to have a more precise answer to this question. According to the Union of Concerned Scientists, ride-hailing trips today result in an estimated 69% more climate pollution on average than the trips they displace. In cities, ride-hailing trips typically displace low-carbon trips such as public transportation, I'm so fucking angry, biking or walking. Uber and Lyft could reduce these emissions with a more concerted effort to electrify its fleet of vehicles or by incentivizing customers to take pooled rides, the group recommends. First off, go fuck yourself. No, that's not the takeaway. They literally said it in the previous sentence. It displaces low-carbon trips such as public transportation, biking, or walking. So I guess we need to ask ourselves, well, what stops people from taking public transportation or biking or walking? Now, let's investigate that for a second. Public transportation fucking sucks, and there's a reason for that. Public transportation systems are run by governments, and governments are run by rich people. That has been the case for the entirety of the United States' existence. Public transportation systems need taxes to run. And when the majority of wealth is continuously being transferred to the upper echelon of class, the ruling class, and when the ruling class either themselves occupies the seat of government or has people on their, let's just call it bluntly, on their payroll to sit in the seats of government, then that allows them not to be taxed. And they, as not the public, don't have to take public transportation. So there's very much a reason why public transportation sucks. And if we're talking about biking or walking, firstly, it's a fucking psychotic thunderdome on the streets for any of those that are biking. And I live in New York City. I was on a bike today. It's harrowing. It's absolutely harrowing. And walking, well, fucking barely, we don't have time to walk. We need to get places faster because we're spending too much time working to enrich that same ruling class. So I'm a bit fucking vexed why the Union of Concerned Scientists would have said something so fucking boneheaded. They should listen to Eat the Rich and understand what the fuck's going on. Tell them what time it is. Let's continue because clearly I'm mad now. However, these strategies alone will address neither the increases in vehicle miles traveled nor rising congestion concerns, the report says. For ride-hailing to contribute to better climate and congestion outcomes, trips must be pooled and electric, displace single-occupancy car trips more often, and encourage low-emissions modes such as mass transit, biking, or walking. Again, look, the internal combustion engine needs to die. I think for anybody that needs to understand what we need to do for our next, for our climate outcome, the internal combustion engine needs to die. We need to increase the viability and, frankly, just the enjoyability of public transportation. I am on public transportation every day. I like it. It's great, but it also fucking sucks. In New York City, it's pretty fucking well documented how bad it is. We need trains in this country. It's the most efficient method of travel, and it's a goddamn pleasure. This is just going forward here just a little bit. It's a tall order, but both Uber and Lyft have shown a willingness to reduce their carbon footprint. Yeah, okay. So far, their methods include introducing bike and scooter sharing services. That doesn't fucking... That's just another profit center for them. Whatever. Integrated public transportation scheduling and ticketing into their respective apps are also included, and incentive programs to get drivers to switch to electric cars. Again, still in their control. So we are still in this solution that The Verge and the Union of Concerned Scientists are discussing here. It still holds the power and outcome of our planet in the hands of a extremely limited amount of shareholders. I would love to do an Eat the Rich episode on the creator of Lyft as well. I was actually doing a little bit of cursory research into it beforehand, and the guy that started it, I forgot his name, he in college did like study abroad in Zimbabwe, and he like fucked their entire... He basically started a ride-sharing thing using Facebook's API. He made like a Facebook app, and he like fucked up like the locals taxi system there. It's a fascinating story. I'd love to do something on him at some point in the future. But just to bring it back to the theme here, tech companies that are absolutely cannibalizing our climate and have no incentive to change anything unless there is enormous public pressure or a complete upending of the profit motive in our transportation systems. Hint, we should do the latter. The second topic that I would like to talk about is the topic of coronavirus. Over the last few weeks, I had kind of personally dismissed it as, something sensational. We shouldn't get too worked up about it. I mean, the facts is that it's not airborne. It does have an incubation time period of 2 weeks. So that proposes a problem because you may not know that you're symptomatic until 2 weeks after exposure. But it's not airborne, and there's all these shortages of, masks. There's been an issue with the diversion of medical supplies like masks being sent to China because it's been so, purchased there. The reality is that the mask won't help you. It's more exposure to what's called droplet exposure, which is like, direct contact with the virus itself. Obviously, for prevention methods, you want to be washing your hands as much as possible. And before you touch your face with your hands, definitely wash your hands. That's absolutely essential. Be mindful of where your hands have been. But as far as the financial impact for coronavirus, the stock market itself has taken an enormous hit in the last few days. Monday of this week had a drop of somewhere around 1,000 points on the Dow Jones Industrial Average. And that was the, I believe, third most largest single drop in the stock market's history. And as for reference of what's happened in the last few days, the stock market as of close of trade on last Friday was at 28,984, dropped 1,000 points on the Monday, and then is at 27,004 points. So that's a 2,000 point drop. I mean, this could be the beginning of the recession. It certainly bodes very poorly. I think what's really important for us to know when we're talking about the health of the United States economy in relation to the coronavirus is don't let anybody say that it is expressly and only because of coronavirus that there's uncertainty in the market and all this stuff. There are endemic problems with global capitalism today. And we know this because, for instance, the Federal Reserve is pumping money into repo markets every fucking night. And I anticipate that we'll be doing kind of a standalone thing, or at least another bit like this on the repo market so we can come to understand it together. But in China, for instance, there were firms that were just not paying their employees, unable to pay their employees, delaying payment to their workers. This is a problem. And you might say, fuck, man, maybe it wasn't such a good idea that we located all of global manufacturing into one country, China. It's a bit of a platitude, but the point is that we can't have a healthy global economy if you have these choke points. And that's exactly what's happening. So to talk about coronavirus's effects on our economy for a moment here. Firstly, it was just announced that Vice President Pence will be in charge of the coronavirus response. Trump gave a speech and tried to reassure the public about the crisis. I'm reading here from Washington Post. It came out on Wednesday evening. A new case of coronavirus was confirmed in the United States on Wednesday as President Trump announced that Vice President Pence will take over the White House's coronavirus task force. We're fine, guys. The president said the risk to Americans is very low. I don't like the coronavirus. It's not great. I'm not a drinker, but I don't even like Corona beer. It's from Mexico. Do that sleepy time, Trump. And that people are being screened coming into the country from infected areas. The Dow Jones Industrial Average endured its worst two-day slump in 4 years on Tuesday. On Wednesday, it was up 300 points shortly after open, but closed down about 124 points. On European and Asian financial markets, economic alarms continued to flash, however, with cases spreading and little sign that the epidemic was relenting after the CDC warned of the inevitable spread in the United States of the COVID-19, the disease caused by the coronavirus. So, and just a few more developments here. A new case of coronavirus was confirmed in the United States on Wednesday, bringing the total number of cases in the country to 60. And again, keep in mind that it has a high mortality rate compared to other forms of the flu. It is a mortality rate of about 2% of patients suffer fatally. The CDC did not specify Wednesday how that person contracted the virus. France reported the first coronavirus death of a French citizen amid a dramatic uptick in cases within Europe. Most new cases are connected to an outbreak in northern Italy, still the largest on the continent. Brazil confirmed its first case, which also marks the first known case in Latin America. Statistics released by the Chinese government showed a decline in the number of new cases in mainland China. An additional 406 cases were reported Wednesday morning, along with 52 deaths. But all 5 of the new cases and all of the new deaths were in Hubei province. I wanted to bring just as an example of how this will constrict and I wanted to use the word neuter, but I thought that would be a little bit strong. There's an interesting article I came across that came out a week or two ago in Science magazine. It's called "The Disruption is Enormous: Coronavirus Epidemic Snarls Science Worldwide." And this is just a really interesting example I thought about that I wanted to share with you guys because it explicitly expresses how interconnected we are and how something like this will neuter our not only our economy but our research. Our research and development. So this is by a gentleman named Robert F. Service, and it reads as follows. Normal daily life has come to a virtual standstill in large parts of China as a result of the epidemic of COVID-19. And so has science. Universities across the country remained closed. Access to labs is restricted. Projects have been mothballed, fieldwork interrupted, and travel severely curtailed. But scientists elsewhere in the world are noticing an impact as well, as collaborations with China are on pause and scientific meetings for the next 5 months have been canceled or postponed. The damage to science pales compared with the human suffering. Total number of cases has risen to 72,000, the World Health Organization reported, almost 99% of them in China, and there have been 1,800 deaths. Still, for individual researchers, the losses can be serious and stressful. Basically, everything has completely stopped, says John Speakman, who runs an animal behavior lab at the Chinese Academy of Sciences. That's been effectively shut since the Lunar New Year on January 25th. The disruption is enormous. Stress on staff is really high. But Speakman says he understands why the Chinese government took the measures. It's annoying, but I completely support what they have done. Disruptions are particularly acute in Wuhan and other cities in the Hubei province, the epicenter of the outbreak, that are almost completely blocked off from the outside world. Sarah Plato, a professor of animal behavior at Jinghan University, says faculty and students living on campus are confined to their apartments. I don't know if you guys saw this, but there was a video of essentially like the party, right, the Communist Party of China, coming to somebody's door and just closing it and locking people in their apartments, and even them asking like, what happens if there's a fire? And they were like, take caution not to have a fire. So it goes on to say, I'll just continue here. Impacts on science are being felt far beyond Wuhan. Throughout China, some 760 million people are under some sort of residential lockdown. That is insane. That's like 1/10 of the entire population of Earth. Experimental research is largely halted at present because students and research staff are not allowed to return into the laboratories. Can you imagine how many assays are just like going to shit and fucking, what's that stuff called? Agar? It goes into agar gum. It goes into like a petri dish and shit, just overgrowing and mold spores and shit, just like taking over labs because they're not being maintained. It's a problem. I don't want to continue into this article too much, not to get too tedious, but as an illustration of the impact that this has on the continuation of our political economy and broadly, you know, the efficient and intellectual propagation of our species. This is bad. This is kind of like a no joke epidemic, and I don't mean it's because, you know, you should be mortally threatened or anything like that. If you are a relatively healthy adult, this of course excludes children or elderly or more so at risk. But if you're a relatively healthy adult, you're not going to be hurt. But as a society continues and as we are a global society, although, you know, we would try not to, we don't act like it, we need to think about how we are structuring our political economy in a way that is decentralized, right? I mean, wealth is centralized. If I'm not mistaken, the top 26 single individuals on Earth own more wealth than the bottom half of the population of Earth, roughly, you know, 3.5 billion people. We've centralized wealth and resources. Work, to no one's surprise, continues to be done by the working class. So I think it stands to suggest that the benefits of our political economy should mainly benefit the working class, those that actually do the work. It's a stark issue, the coronavirus. Obviously, I would suggest that everybody take relative precautions. Washing hands is an important thing for nearly any disease prevention, and especially in a pandemic like this, it's very important. But I will bring us down and eat the rich style with one more piece of information here. There was a testimony in front of a congressional committee today from the Health and Human Services Secretary, Azar, and he was asked by a Congresswoman Schakowsky from Illinois whether or not the coronavirus would be affordable for anyone, and he speaks as follows.
Reaffirm, then you're saying it will for sure be affordable for anyone who needs it.
I'm saying we would want to ensure that we work to make it affordable, but we can't control that price because we need the private sector to invest. The priority is to get vaccines and therapeutics. Price controls won't get us there.
Mr. Secretary, thank you.
So this to me is fucking stunning. I mean, absolutely fucking stunning. This is the Health and Human Services Secretary explaining that if you want not to die from this, you have to personally be able to pay for it. And he's passing the buck of the reason that this is not going to, cover all Americans. That he's explaining specifically that your ability not to die from this is based on your actual ability to pay for this. And he passes the buck onto the private companies that create vaccines. Now, why is this a problem? Anybody that's listening to this fucking knows. The profit motive is, especially in a case like this, in a market economy, markets allocate resources to those who can pay the most for them, right? This is like fucking, think about how eBay works. Highest bidder gets the product. If we have a situation that this turns into a true pandemic, it is going to be the most vulnerable of our population, our least resourced people, our working class, our poor, that are affected the most. I don't think I need to explain any longer, you know, how fucking disgusting that is, but that's exactly what we're dealing with. As we discussed earlier in the episode, when you have a burgeoning fascistic government, this is the kind of thing that starts to happen, and it is just another episode in a long, brutal history of a very brutal government in the United States. So the final item of business I would like for us to discuss is an interesting article that came across my desk about Fairway Markets. Fairway Markets was a regional grocery chain local to New York City, and it recently filed for bankruptcy. Now, there's obviously a story behind that, as there is behind all bankruptcies, but this one was interesting, caught my eye because it involved private equity. And private equity, I think it's no secret that they're one of the most vulture-like and parasitic entities and instruments of capital that there is, and what it did, especially to an institution that is, is meant to feed our population in the largest city in the United States. I just thought it was something that we should investigate a little bit further. So I'd like to get into this material now. And it's called, the title of the article is How Private Equity Wrecked New York's Favorite Grocery. The subtitle here says, a firm with no retail food experience expanded the company too quickly and loaded it with debt. I'm going to end up reading a good amount of this article, and I do so at the risk of sounding a bit monotonous to you, and I hope I'm not, but it seems to me to be really poignant and really emblematic of kind of a larger issue that I think is really important for us to have a discussion about, which is the role of private equity and what their business model really is. So I don't want to spoil too much, and I want to kind of keep this a bit free-form here and have a conversation together and kind of get our gears turning and try to figure this out. So I'm going to read this here. This was written by a gentleman named Joe Nocera. I'm going to look into his profile actually really quickly. He's old. It says here, Joe Nocera is a Bloomberg opinion columnist covering business. He has written business columns for Esquire, GQ, and the New York Times, and is the former editorial director of Fortune. And now what happened, Joe? His latest project is the Bloomberg Wondery podcast, The Shrink Next Door. Honestly, I don't have the fucking patience to go in and listen to that. So if there's anybody that wants to take one for the team and listen to that and tell me, DM me or something like that and tell me all about Joe Nocera, I am all for it. Okay, so let's get into this here and let's learn what happened to Fairway. He'll explain what Fairway is all about, but Fairway was a really cool grocery store in New York City. In general, and we'll talk about this later as kind of like a larger point, but like one of the things that I think is fucking disgusting and that pisses me off the most about our capitalist political economy is the erosion of like national chains. I find I'm sorry, did I say national chains? The erosion of regional chains. I mean, I've tweeted about this a lot, and I think we even did a poll about this, about like the different like kind of regional burger joints. We're talking about Shake Shack, In-N-Out, Culver's, Whataburger. I think someone was talking about like Steak and Shake or something like that. I don't remember exactly. If I'm missing some, sound off in the DMs or something like that. But regional chains and regional stores are fucking great. They're charming. It's who you are. It's the area in which you come from. And, to make kind of a larger point too, what's funny to me, and this is always, I always think about this, is like the people that we are annoyingly informed by our upbringings, right? Like your parents, your culture, your where you grew up and who were your peers and what was your, economic background and stuff. It's annoyingly informative to tell you kind of who you end up, what's your lived experience you are as a person. And so to have something like a regional chain around you, you kind of remember that. I mean, even for me as a kid, I remember there was kind of like a local, just, a single store, a single kind of fast food burger, hot dog restaurant with ice cream. And you would go there as a kid, and it was like one of the most kind of like exciting things I remember doing. Like, we were going to this place. It was a big deal, and they had little swings outside you can swing on. I mean, kids can get dizzy for hours, and now I'll fucking puke if I ever like spin around in an office chair too hard. But having those kind of like one-off little places is so charming. And so to get back to the point, for Fairway here, it was a regional chain of grocery stores in New York City, and there was only a few of them. So let's get into the meat of the article here and see what we can learn, because I think it's going to make you feel like I was going, like I did today when I read it, which was the fucking Arthur meme where he's like clenching his fist. Oh God, you hold too much tension in our fucking muscles. We don't even talk about it that much. All right, let's get into this. Okay, Joe Nocera, let's hear what you got to say. Have we finally reached a point where we can automatically assume that every new retail disaster has been caused by a private equity firm? Yes, I believe we have. When the New York Post published a report on Tuesday contending that the New York Fairway Market grocery chain was going to liquidate, a claim denied by the company, fucking hilarious, which was subsequently filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy protection on Thursday, I began exploring whether private equity was indeed responsible for its problems. Narrator voice. It was. The year was 2007. Fairway, a treasured New York institution that was founded in 1933, had grown from one store on the Manhattan's Upper West Side to 4 stores, 3 in New York City and one on Long Island. Shout out to Strong Island. The stores stores were supermarket sized, but they didn't resemble a Safeway or a Kroger. They were eclectic. 50 brands of olive oil, dozens of varieties of olives, cheese, smoked salmon. I'm starving and salivating. Imported beer, and who knows what else. It was quintessential New York. On a per square foot basis, the four Fairways were among the highest grossing grocery stores in the country. So think about that for a second. Obviously in real estate, by the way, I'm just going to make a bunch of asides here as we're talking about this, and just bear with me or yell into your headphones. I don't know, whatever you want to do. On a per square foot basis, the 4 Fairways were among the highest grossing grocery stores in the country. So in real estate and in business, you often think about things on a per square foot basis. Like if you were a developer, a real estate developer, God forbid, and you were creating retail space, let's say for the ground floor of a mixed use building, you would want to see how high you can get the rent on a per square foot basis. So for a company to have the highest grossing grocery stores on a per square foot basis in the country, that's a fucking incredible achievement. Now, if we think about this economically, there could be different reasons for this, right? Like they're selling olive oil, cheese, smoked salmon. That might be because the things that they tend to sell are of higher value. Howie Glickberg, the grandson of the founder, was one of 3 partners who owned Fairway Market, right? Privately held company. The other 2 were ready to cash out, and others in management who held small equity stakes were looking for a payday. So it's actually kind of interesting. I think it's called an ESOP, an employee stock ownership program. So some management have an actual stock in the actual shares of the company, which is great because that, theoretically will incentivize people to perform well and take pride in their work and blah, blah, blah. Totally cool. By the way, worker-owned co-op, democratically run is a better way to do it. Spoiler alert. But anyway, this is nice. So looking for a payday, Glickberg needed a source of liquidity. So he's got, the owner, the grandson of the founder, he's got 2 partners looking to split and get the cash. They're probably fucking, grandchildren as well and just want to go drink margaritas in the beach in Key West or whatever, but whatever. So he needs somebody to step up and get these guys out. Unfortunately for him, he found Sterling Investment Partners, a private equity firm based in Westport, Connecticut that focuses on mid-market companies. For those of you that don't know, mid-market means companies that generally earn annual revenue between $100 million and $3 billion per year. So that's what we talk about, mid-market. I hope you don't mind, too, that I'm going to I kind of like how we on Eat the Rich try to gain financial and fiduciary literacy with everybody. So if I can, I'd like to kind of talk about this stuff and just give you definitions as we go. Fucking got to eat our broccoli before we get to the dessert here. All right. Glickberg said, I was looking to expand the business. Glickberg told me when I caught up with him on Wednesday afternoon. In the ensuing buyout, Sterling put up $150 million into the company in return for an 80% ownership stake. The majority of that was debt. Needless to say, the debt landed on Fairway's books, not Sterling's. 3 Sterling partners, including co-founder Charles Santoro, joined the board. None of them had any grocery experience. So to just back up here for a second. In private equity, how it tends to work is if you as a partner in a private equity firm, meaning you as a worker, as an owner of the private equity firm, you literally have your equity in there, right? You tend to have your equity in there. Or in the case of other private equity, maybe you don't have your own equity in the company that you're investing in. You're doing it on behalf of other investors, other people's equity. But you, as let's just call it an investment management manager, joins the board to say, hey, we're going to do this and we're going to cut this and we're going to fire these people and you're going to make it profitable. And that's how it kind of works. So 3 of the partners for Sterling Investment Partners joined the board of Fairway. None of them had any grocery experience. Sterling Investment had enormous ambitions for the company. Glickberg had envisioned expanding slowly, a store at a time. Santoro, now slowly doesn't tend to work for capital, but let's keep going. Santoro, one of the Sterling partners, one of the co-founders of Sterling Partners, talked about turning Fairway into a national chain with hundreds of stores that would compete with Whole Foods and Trader Joe's. Santoro did not respond to an email request for an interview. By 2012, so now we're a few years into this, about 5 years later, Fairway was up to 12 stores, so it doubled its footprint, including some in suburban New Jersey. Shout out to our New Jersey fans. Mike, what up? Where the company's urban cachet didn't necessarily translate. Most of this expansion... I don't want to make any New Jersey jokes, but I will.
You know, we got all the Parmesan cheese with the cellulose in it. Hey, honey,
Hey, where do you get the Parmesan cheese with the cellulose? With this fancy shit? Might cut that. Nah, fucking. Most of the expansion was fueled by yet more debt. Not surprisingly, the expansion eviscerated the company's profits while adding millions more in debt to its balance sheet. By 2012, its debt burden had grown to more than $200 million, and it was losing more than $10 million per year. Now, you say to yourself, Dwight, hang on, something's not adding up. Something's not making sense. How are they going into debt with this company when the private equity firm made the investment? Well, let's listen to this a little bit further and see if we can't figure this out. Because if we know one thing about capital, they always win. Continuing here, badly in need of cash, Sterling turned to the public markets. In April 2013, Fairway Group Holdings Corporation, as the company was now called, went public at $13 a share. So the private equity firm was like, you know, we've put a lot of money into this, and frankly, things aren't going so well. We've been a tad aggressive. Let's have the public buy shares of it, and we will make good on some of our own debt. They raised $177 million. Its prospectus. A prospectus is like if you're a company and you want somebody to invest in you, it's like a little booklet you put together. Say, hey, here's what we're doing, blah, blah, blah. It's called due diligence, like when an investor or an investment banker or something wants to look into a company to see what's going on, what are the fundamentals, kind of kick the tires and stuff. They'll look at a prospectus. Obviously, if you're smart, if you're savvy, you'll go beyond the prospectus and see what's going on with the actual company, get down to the nuts and bolts, talk to someone on the dock, so you get the point. Its prospectus said that the money would go towards new store growth and other general corporate purposes. That's fucking vague, but let's keep going. But that wasn't quite accurate. The prospectus showed that more than $880 million went to pay dividends to shareholders, preferred shareholders, i.e. Sterling Investment Partners, and an additional $7.3 million went to management. Holy shit. Holy shit. So $87.3 million of those $177 million raised by the IPO went directly into the fucking pockets of the private equity fuckers. Like I said, capital always wins. Let's keep going. Around the same time as the IPO, Glickberg was pushed aside and fuck, that's so fucked. And the new chief executive officer was brought in. Oh man, it's like I'm sure there's like movies and shit about this, but like you literally just like let the wolf into your house and you're like, I can't figure out why he fucking slit my jugular with his incisors. So he was pushed aside as CEO, who was brought in, an accountant who had been an executive at Grand Union, a grocery chain that failed in 2013. They got this guy for cheap, right? They figured, well, here's a guy that has also ran a regional grocery chain, and he's out of a job, so maybe we can save a little coin by hiring this schmahoo. Glickberg did stay on the board, however, where he was the only person with either grocery or retail experience. That is fucked. By 2014, Fairway was up to 15 stores. Its directors, a number of them Sterling executives, were paying themselves absurd amounts of money. $12 million in 2013, according to the company's proxy. Santoro, remember he's the co-founder of Sterling Investment Partners, Santoro alone took $5.4 million that year at a company with a market cap below $170 million. Let's do the math. Well, it doesn't even fucking matter. They were losing, remember we just learned about this, they were losing more than $10 million a year. 5.4 million of that, by the way, was going into the fucking pocket of the initial private equity investor. So it's not about whether or not the thing was profitable. It's about just milking it, man. It's about milking it. Continuing here, and that wasn't the only problem with how Fairway was being run. Hannah Howard, Fairway's former director of communications, would later describe what it looked like from the inside. So this is the fucking, Enron, smartest guys in the room retrospective here. She says, the place was kind of a mess. It took months to get paid, with leadership claiming paychecks had been lost on the truck to Red Hook. That's fucking hilarious. Red Hook, by the way, is, I believe it was like the main location for Fairway. It was the largest anyway, down in Red Hook, Brooklyn, which is fucking, hey, it got lost in the truck. What can you say? She said, as expansion scaled, finding talented, knowledgeable staff became more difficult, so quality at new locations began to suffer. It became increasingly apparent that Fairway's corporate leaders were good at running 2 or 3 stores, but they didn't make the right preparations to run a dozen. They were not the processes or systems in place that were scalable, says one erstwhile executive. The leadership was completely incompetent. Yeah, no fucking shit. But as we're understanding here as Eat the Rich listeners, it's not the point. The point isn't to service the, your communities that you're servicing with food distribution. The point is to take that cash, brother. Meanwhile, Whole Foods and Trader Joe's were expanding methodically. When Amazon Incorporated bought Whole Foods, it meant that Fairway had a competitor with limitless cash. Again, not a great takeaway, but okay. Fairway's vaunted, what the fuck does vaunted mean? It doesn't matter. Fairway's vaunted revenue per square foot numbers dropped by a third. Cash flow was consistently negative. The stores looked increasingly shabby because the company couldn't afford to keep them up. By 2016, saddled with $267 million in debt, Fairway filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy protection. It hadn't turned a quarterly profit the entire time it was a public company. You just got to pause for a second because you think about who invests in the stock market. I mean, the reality is, don't quote me. I mean, quote me, but don't quote me. If I understand correctly, it's like 10% of the shareholders, meaning like 10% of people that participate in stocks in general, stonks, own 80% of the shares. So it's not surprising. The rest of us, the rest of the 20% is like us. 401ks, 403bs, our pensions, all of our investments, the things that fucking hopefully we retire on in this fucking American Thunderdome. By the way, don't retire in a recession if you're counting on your 401k because you're fucked. How fucking insane is that? It's just like saying like capitalism we know crashes every 4 to 7 years. So how is it fucking possible that like every 4 to 7 years just people can't retire? Oh God. Okay, continuing here. Here perhaps is the strangest part of the story. Although Fairway managed to reduce its debt by $140 million through the bankruptcy process, which we can talk about another time, it didn't use bankruptcy to close stores or break up any of its expensive leases. For instance, $6 million alone for the flagship store in the Upper West Side. It didn't try to go back to what it was, a small chain of groceries that were part of New York's central nervous system. Meanwhile, Sterling Investment Partners, having milked Fairway for 9 years, walked away. Another private equity firm, the Blackstone Group, hint, they're pieces of shit, took over, and Glickberg retired. Fucking incredible. What a fucking legacy. Glickberg retired. The grandson of the founder that founded the corporation, founded the grocery store. A neighborhood grocery store in 1933. And this is what it fucking comes down to. I don't know. It makes me fucking mad, and I hope it makes you mad too, because this is bullshit. By August 2018, Blackstone had exited and the company had been bought by 2 other private equity firms. So this is just like fucking, it's like scrap dealers. Brigade Capital Management LP, sounds great, and Goldman Sachs Group Incorporated. Hey guys, I see you everywhere. In November, they hired a new CEO, a turnaround specialist named Abel Porter, who actually did have grocery experience. He was the 4th CEO in 6 years. So let's take a second here, because if my blood vessels in my eye are going to burn when I get burst when I get to the next paragraph. You'll see why when I say this. But typically, what happens in a bankruptcy proceeding is, I didn't want to get into all of this, but I will. In a bankruptcy proceeding, they typically hire turnaround managers. So these are like management consultants groups. There's a lot of them. I mean, any of the big 4 firms do this. Ernst & Young, PricewaterhouseCoopers, like those fuckers. They will install someone as CEO, and basically they are working on behalf of like the creditors committee. And I think we've talked about this in an episode of Eat the Rich, where in a bankruptcy, the bankruptcy court puts together what's called a creditors committee. So this is like everybody that the company owes money to. First one, obviously, that gets paid out first with any remaining money is always the U.S. government and local governments, any taxes that you owe. And then, other obligations like, your vendors. Let's say these guys bought olive oil from a vendor and they owe the vendor, $500,000. So basically the CEO installed by the management consultant will say, maybe, okay, olive oil vendor, look, we can't get you the $500,000 that we owe, but we can pay you $270,000. And then they'll hem and haw and their lawyers will go back and forth, and then eventually they'll kind of like, settle on it. So that's what really the bankruptcy courts are structured to do. When capitalism fails, and again, every 4 to 7 years, when capitalism fails, this is just kind of here to say, like, look, you're fucked, but let's at least get you something so, like, the entire economy doesn't fucking collapse. Again, meanwhile, now we're a few years past the exit of the initial private equity fuckers that bought it, and they're sitting pretty up in fucking Westport, Connecticut, driving around their freaking, I don't know what these old guys drive anymore. Whatever. So, okay, Abel Porter, he's the new CEO installed as a turnaround specialist. This is what he said at Bloomberg News. We're not burning cash, we're accumulating cash. And that is the sound of Dwight's eyeball exploding. He added that there was no risk of running out of capital, despite a debt level that exceeded $300 million. In that same time, sorry, DSA is texting me. In that same article, however, a credit analyst for Moody's Investment Service, Mickey Chadha, predicted that Fairway would need to be restructured again within 18 months. More money was going out the door than was coming in. No fucking, like, that's what's so fucking incredible to me, is that there's like $1 billion worth of dudes surrounding this thing. And now we're 11 years past its initial purchase by private equity. And the takeaway is like, well, see, the thing about business is you need to take in more money than you spend. Like, they don't, I cannot believe these people are as rich as they are. They don't deserve it. A few months ago, Chadha from Moody's here updated his analysis of Fairway bonds. He said that as of June, the company's remaining cash was down to $10 million, and he predicted that would continue to dwindle through 2020. The company, he concluded, has limited alternative sources of liquidity, as virtually all tangible and intangible assets are pledged to the credit facilities. Remember exactly what I said. So that's exactly what the fuck I'm talking about. In the bankruptcy court, they're like, look, at the end of the day, if this company continues to get revenue, right, from people fucking buying olive oil and goddamn Parmesan, that money has to go to the creditors that you owe money to. So they're continuing to hemorrhage money. As part of its bankruptcy plan, Fairway agreed to sell 5 stores and a distributions facility to Village Supermarket Incorporated for $70 million. Village Supermarket is another grocery chain owned by a family, the Sumas family of New Jersey. It seems to have done what Sterling Investment Partners could not: expand sensibly. The company now has 30 stores. If a handful of Fairway stores end up being run by the Sumas family, it will have saved an institution that private equity nearly destroyed. I'm upset about what happened, Glickberg told me. They made a lot of bad decisions. They brought in people who knew nothing about the business and nothing about New York. My grandfather started the company, so it was more than a business to me. Well, clearly fucking not, dude, because you wanted to... Okay, let's save our blood pressure for another time. So Joe Nocera here, the writer of this opinion article, finishes by saying, I guess one moral of this story is that if you run a family company, don't sell it to a private equity firm unless you don't care what happens afterward. But mainly, it reaffirms what we are all coming to realize. Private equity firms like Sterling Investment Partners aren't on the side of the companies they buy. Not really. They're out for themselves. I read this, and what I think strikes me the most that is noticeably absent from this entire piece, which I think is not a surprise because this is all being written about and discussed by rich managers, professional managerial class, or in some cases just capital themselves. What's noticeably absent from this entire thing is the workers. How are the workers who put themselves in limbo to, just go at the whims of these literally like 3 people? They're not looked after, they're not concerned about at all. No one's looking after them. Nobody cares. That's not the point of capital. That's not the point of capitalism. Like we were talking about in the beginning of this episode, the point of capitalism is not to work for the majority. It's to work just for capital. That's why socialism is different. It's to work for society. So the workers in this entire scenario here are never talked about, never discussed, and are the ones that are fucked. The expansion and contraction of the amount of grocery stores that they have is completely subjective to the owners and to the creditors committee and whatever fucking mosaic of hedge funds and private equity funds rather own it at the time. FYI, too, that in bankruptcy filings, often one of the first expenses that does not get paid out as part of the creditors committee is the pensions of the workers that have spent their lives working there. That's what always fucking got me about when the bootlickers of capital say like, oh, well, the people that are, at the heads of the companies, the founders, whatever, they're the ones that took the risk to put together the business, so they're the ones that should reap the most rewards. Fucking bullshit. The workers, as we just learned in this piece, are the most vulnerable people. They're taking the risk by, employing themselves and putting food on their family's table based off of whether or not the company turns a profit, which it hadn't done in years. It's so fucking nuts to me. I can't believe, and just to bring it home, to bring it like maybe to like kind of a more tug at your heartstrings kind of level, for people that grew up in New York City and that maybe, had, the kind of money to be able to shop at Fairway, and just to go back thinking about that like ice cream store that I went to growing up, like to think that something as precious as a place that you go to a market, like a market is a concept like it's fucking old as civilization, and to have that just to be commoditized and chewed up and spit out and just sold for parts just so like literally 3 dudes can get marginally just a tiny bit richer. Like what the fuck does Santoro need with an additional $5.3 million each year? Fuck off, dude. Fuck all the way off. He doesn't need anything. He doesn't need it. I've been meaning to like say this at some point that I haven't really had the forum to, and I hope I kind of disseminate this well, but like I've been thinking about billionaires in general lately, and I was trying to like come up with an allegory or a euphemism to explain like what a billionaire is, and this is what I came up with. It's like if there was some epidemic, there is an epidemic going on now, but anyway, if there was like an epidemic of like some terrible disease that people were getting, a billionaire is the dude that gets the vaccine and then walks around in the streets with a bag over his shoulder full of fucking vaccines, and everyone is clamoring at him like, please God, I'm fucking dying, like I have children to take care of, I'm gonna fucking die, I'm gonna get the fucking pandemic and die. And even though the billionaire only needed one, he's holding that sack of the vaccines and he's like, nah, I'm good, man, I'm gonna hold on to all these. Fuck you, by the way, fuck you, got mine, I'm gonna hold on to all these, even though he only needed one vaccine to save himself and be vaccinated and live. So in trying to bring this episode to a close, I think I would just like to express that as we have some of these news articles and pieces of information and happenings that are going on within our society come across us, I think we should make sure to examine what's really going on in our political economy. Who is this benefiting, right? That's a really good question that I don't think is asked enough, because we always talk about like, well, who's this harming? We need to ask, who are the beneficiaries of the system that we're propagating here? And I think what we've learned from all of these news articles is that, under capitalism, there is a very specific set of beneficiaries, and any time that there is a drive towards capital efficiency, labor is the one who loses. And when we look into, for instance, in the case of the coronavirus, who pays for all of the medical attention that needs to go to the people? It's us. It's the taxpayer. Some of that is going to go to directly to the shareholders of whatever the vaccine manufacturers are, if that's even something that's feasible at this point. So I would like everybody to stay sharp. I would like for everybody to keep their ear to the ground and listen and see what's going on. And most importantly, stay cool, folks. Till next time.
Whoa, hey, ring the alarm, another sound is dying. Whoa, hey, some sound like a big jump on. Listen the sound, it's a champion. Rock the dance in any session. Rock up the woman and rock up the man. Ring the alarm, another sound is dying. Whoa, hey, ring the alarm, another sound is dying. Whoa, hey, Tato, we beat them all in a row. Donkey want water, but you hold him Joe. Tato, we beat them all in a row. The cost more water, but holding Joe. Ring the alarm, another sound is dying. Whoa, hey, ring the alarm, another sound is dying. Whoa, hey, four big sound in a one big lawn. The dance sound I play, the other three keep calm. Four big sound in a one big lawn. The boom sound I play, the other three keep calm. Ring the alarm, another sound is dying. Whoa, hey, remember this sound, it's a talk of the town, talk of the country. Hey, rock Mr. Charlie, rock Miss Munchie, talk of the country. So, ring the alarm, another sound is dying. I know, ring the alarm, another sound is suffering. Whoa, hey, watch the sound man a timber, watch the sound man a pray, watch the sound man a timber, watch the sound man a pray. Ring the alarm, another sound is dying. I know, ring the alarm, another sound is suffering. Whoa, hey, little of this sound and little of that. Rock is the calm and rock is the pat. Rock the white and rock up the black. Sweet reggae music on the attack, yes. On the attack it gone, on the attack. Sweet reggae music on straight non-stop. Ring the alarm, another sound is dying. Whoa, hey, ring the alarm, another sound is suffering. Whoa, hey, some sound like a big jump on. Listen to this sound, it's a champion. Round the dance in any session. Rock the woman and move up the man. Ring the alarm, another sound is suffering. Whoa, hey, ring the alarm, another sound is dying. Whoa, hey, we beat them here and we beat them there. We beat them all over this atmosphere. Champion sound with champion sound with champion sound with